What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Dynasty Stock Market here on the Fantasy Stock Exchange. We got a really fun episode for you guys today, doing some Dynasty buy or sell rookie edition. But first, before we hop into it, going to introduce my good pal, Danny. Danny, how you doing, man?
Doing well, doing well. Just super pumped to be on this video with you today, Mikey. I mean, we're basically just going to be going through, as you mentioned, these buy or sell scenarios that are basically going to be basically evaluating how rookies are going to do in the rookie season by 2021. You guys will find out those exact scenarios. First of all, again, you asked me how I was doing. How's your day been? I mean, your Flyers took one from my Habs last night, so I'm kind of salty about that one.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think it was a game that the Flyers really deserved to walk away with a win, but hey, I will take an ugly playoff win over a fantastic playoff loss any day of the week. So got to say I'm pretty excited about it. And you know what? I knew the first game I was talking a lot of smack to you. The second game you were talking a lot of smack to me. But how that game was going last night, I did not want to bring any bad karma into this world. I just had to keep quiet until it was over.
Yeah, I mean, like we saw that first goal go in, Voracek with an absolute duster in front of the net a few minutes in. And then after that, I mean, from a Canadian's perspective, just post after fucking post. And then when we weren't hitting the post, we were taking fucking dumb penalties. So, yeah, that was definitely hard to watch as a Habs fan. I'm sure you guys were grinding your teeth, waiting for that game to just fall over as a Flyers fan. But yeah, definitely ready for what that game forward is going to bring, because we need to win that to make that series 2-2.
Oh, absolutely. And as soon as I guess when this video comes out, it'll be Wednesday morning. So we'll know the result of game 4. And then we'll be looking forward to game 5 that exact same day. So
sure.
we'll see. I mean, I'm hoping that the Flyers take game 4, but I guess you never know. I don't want to talk any smack right now, man. I'm too nervous about it.
Oh, man. I'm definitely nervous. I literally went from, oh, well, we're the 12th seed. I don't expect us to really do much. Let's just take our loss to Pittsburgh, get either the 1st or the 9th pick, to now, oh, you know what? We have a legitimate chance of upsetting the number 1 seed in the fucking conference. So I'm definitely excited to see how this series turns out. But I will say, from these 3 games, maybe apart from game 2, because that one was kind of just like taken away, I will say game 1 and 3 especially was some grindy, physical, fast, fun watching hockey. I will say it was definitely entertaining to watch those teams absolute battering each other. I mean, the physicality is the one thing I was really taken away from the series. But anyways, we'll make a hockey segment one day. But for now, let's talk some Dynasty fantasy football, and let's talk these rookies.
Absolutely. So before we get into it, I'm going to mention we're going to do 5 running backs and 5 receivers today. They are pretty much the consensus top 5 running backs, and then 4 out of 5 of our receivers are in the top 5 consensus. And something tells me the extra one in there is going to find himself in the top 5, top 6 rookie wide receiver conversation any day now, especially with all the hype. But we'll get to that a little bit later. We're going to start off with the obvious rookie that everyone wants to talk about, and that's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I have a situation for you, and you're going to tell me if you're going to buy it or sell it. If you're buying it, you say, yeah, absolutely, that's going to happen. If you're selling it, you're saying, nah, no way. So buy or sell. Clyde Edwards' yearly floor for the next few years is going to be 1,200 scrimmage yards and 8 touchdowns.
This one is an obvious buy for me. So, I mean, I had to build up the tension there. But, man, this is just the easiest smash, buy, cop, whatever you want to say. It's basically freaking Boxing Day. You're heading to the mall and buying everything in sight, because that's basically how I'm feeling about this Clyde Edwards-Helaire take. I mean, if I'm looking at it, I'm sure you will put the splits on the screen. I'll send these over to you. But basically, I recently tweeted out this just how successful Damian Williams was in 2019 last year when he met a 50% snap threshold. So the graphic should be on the screen right now. But basically, in the games that Damian Williams played and received those 50% snaps or more, his PPR points were 18.5, 8.6, 6.8, 20.8, 15.9, 18.2, and 31.4. So that is a 17.2 point per game or RB10 pace when extrapolated. Now, that's just at 50%. I do believe CEH this year, moving forward, is going to be a guy who's basically going to figure into that like Kareem Hunt type snap percentage in that 60, 70% range. So, I mean, if you're looking at it, what does that equate to? In those games, Damian Williams averaged 91.7 yards from scrimmage per game and had 5 touchdowns in those 7 games. So if you pace that over a full 16, that's 1,467 yards from scrimmage and 11 touchdowns across a 16-game pace. So, I mean, with Clyde, when he is healthy, there will just simply be no way he falls below those thresholds. And again, as I mentioned, like, he may very well enter into that Kareem Hunt type range in Dynasty over these next few years and even be that consensus top 5 running back that we're looking for based on just how the KC offense will use him. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm buying this 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I mean, I'm smashing the buy on this one. I mean, even if there, I don't, in my opinion, there's no possibility that he sees less than even this. This is a pessimistic number. I'm just pointing that out. But let's say he only has 40 receptions, right? 40 receptions with his 1,200 yards and 8 scores. That is 224 PPR fantasy points, which is good enough to be a literal top 12 running back, which is an RB1 in most leagues. So I'm smashing that because, as you were saying, when Damian Williams was on and he was getting the target share and the rushing attempts that he was getting, he was on. You know, he was averaging over 17 points a game, and it's really hard to imagine that Clyde Edwards-Helaire doesn't see at least a 50% share in his first year. Now, I will say I'm not going to go in and buy him at a 60 to 70% share his rookie year, but I think it will easily be up to that by as soon as his second year in the league. I think it's going to take a little while for him to come on, but even still, coming in as a rookie running back, there's very little to practically no competition on this roster in that backfield. I mean, it's Darrell Williams, DeAndre Washington, and Darwin Thompson. I mean, who's really worried about those guys stealing significant work from Clyde Edwards?
The only one they could sign, and you guys should be worried about, is if they sign me. Yeah, there's nothing there that worries me. I mean, maybe you can view a guy like fucking DeAndre Washington, 17th round in a best ball as a fucking handcuff, but realistically, that's all you're getting with that. And that's simply just because of the KC offense. I mean, if you're looking at it, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in terms of usage, first of all, he's a very talented back. People don't even want to credit that on Twitter, like, oh, he's in KC, that's the only reason he's going to be good. No, he's actually a really good back in general as well. Clear top 5 back in this class. You want to argue he's 5, you want to argue he's 1. I am not going to argue with anybody on that because the top 5 was pretty decided this year, in my opinion. Now, if you're actually talking about it in terms of fit in the offense, I mean, realistically, we pointed to what Damian Williams and his success he had. I mean, RB10 if you extrapolated those numbers. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, to me, is just a better version of Damian Williams. And maybe he's not Kareem Hunt in the running game, but in terms of the reception game, I do think he can kind of near that plateau, I will say. But, I mean, if you're getting anywhere near Kareem Hunt, and that is a guy who finished RB4 in his rookie season, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Clyde Edwards-Helaire had that type of upside with the floor of being said top 10 based on what Damian Williams did even last year. So you're going to hear it a lot, but I mean, Clyde Edwards is one of my favorite running backs, even in redraft. I mean, I'm pretty on board with taking him even as my first selected player. So I know it's hard because, again, like you want to go with the trusted players and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you're able to pair him with a guy like freaking, let's say, Aaron Jones, let's say in the second round, I mean, I'll do that all day, 24/7, and you'd lock down a top 12 running back core. So I really like that. What are your thoughts, though?
Yeah, no, I like I said, I completely agree. And even with taking him in the first round, for me personally, it's a little rich for my blood. I would take him in the early second round. And like you said, the only reason why is because there is a handful of players that you know are going to be fantastic for fantasy this year. There's a handful of guys that you're going to have to accept taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire over. And that's just something that I still haven't come around to personally. But I will say this 1,200 yards from scrimmage and 8 touchdowns, I do think that's going to be the floor for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So he is definitely an upside pick, but he's also a very safe pick as that bottom like RB1 in terms of where he's going to finish on the year. So I could totally see the argument for taking him at the end of the first round. I personally won't do it, but I'm still buying his 1,200 scrimmage yards, 8 touchdowns.
Fully agree. We're on board now. Who was the second name?
All right, so we are moving on, and actually right behind you, you have some jerseys from this team. Dallas Cowboy receiver CeeDee Lamb. I have a feeling you're going to buy this one, just a sneaking suspicion, but buy or sell. CeeDee Lamb is going to have himself 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie.
I mean, you alluded to it. Man, this is a buy for me. This is going to be a buy. I mean, if you're just looking at it, obviously, it's hard sometimes if you just take numbers from the previous year and extrapolate them to the next year. But I mean, if you're just looking at it, 596 attempts from Dak is definitely doable, especially with the addition I have mentioned multiple times of Mike McCarthy. Yes, the impact in game script is probably going to reduce the rushing attempts or the passing attempts, in that regard. But then Mike McCarthy's pass splits are going to rise them right back. So I do still think that Dallas is definitely going to be in that 575, 580, maybe even more pass attempt range. And if that is the case, there is 190 vacated targets from Dallas, with the main ones being the departures of Jason Witten and Randall Cobb, who each received 83 targets last year. 83 targets from Randall Cobb, ranked third on the team, again, behind Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper. Now, if you're extrapolating that, I do think from a player basis, from a talent basis, CeeDee Lamb is going to receive more than said 83 targets. Now, whether that means he's going to hit 100, 110, we have yet to see. But I do think that Dallas can have, realistically, 3 receivers hit that 100 target mark. And with CeeDee Lamb, he's just a guy where if he is getting 100 targets, in terms of just being consistent, being hands, I mean, he's got probably the best hands already in the receiving core, which is like weird to say from a rookie. But if you're looking at in terms of drop rates, I mean, Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup were lower in that regard in terms of what we expect from CeeDee. Now, if you're looking at it, me saying that he's going to cross 1,000 means I fully believe, I mean, we're probably going to have a Bull Takes episode soon enough, but I do think Dallas has said it all offseason, but I do think they are the first team since 2008 to have 3 receivers cross that 1,000-yard plateau, and I do fully believe that's going to happen this year. Again, I have talked up Jarwin, I have talked up CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. I mean, I'll just talk up the whole Cowboys offense because I am that much of a believer of this team. There's plenty of production to go around, realistically. That's why I have Dak as my number 3 quarterback. If you're looking at it, though, 166 vacated targets from the tight end and the wide receiver position. Well, people are going to say, oh, well, Blake Jarwin's going to take a step. Yeah, well, Blake Jarwin already had north of 40 targets last year. So realistically, how many of those 83 targets that Jason Witten is leaving behind do you expect Blake Jarwin to be? Because if you're expecting Blake Jarwin to have 125 targets, he may very well be your top 5 tight end. It's just not going to happen. So, I mean, that's realistically what? 50, 60 unaccounted for targets. Now, where are those targets going to go? Okay, you can say there's a little increase with Tony Pollard. You can say there's a little increase with Zeke. But realistically, there should be in line those supplemented targets from Jason Witten going to the vacated targets already left behind by Randall Cobb. If that's the case, that should be absorbed by CeeDee Lamb. Now, it may sound bold saying he's going to hit 1,000. I mean, especially in the situation, oh, well, he's the 3rd wide receiver on the depth chart, fourth weapon in the offense. But I mean, in terms of a talent, in terms of how they're going to be used, in terms of how they're going to throw the ball and how successful and efficient they're going to throw the ball this year, I am fully buying that CeeDee Lamb. Hot take, I will say it, but man, I am fully on board with that guy. This may sound bold. I would not be shocked if we're talking about a guy who in his rookie season led receivers in both receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. I mean, he is that much of a talent. He was a top 10 player on my board, the wide receiver 1 going into the draft. I actually wrote the article for him on our draft guide site. You guys can check that out in the description if you haven't already caught that. But man, I am fully on board with this. May sound like a homer. I mean, you can balance it out and convince them that this is not just bias, but man, I am super excited to watch him play this year.
Hey man, I will never call you a homer because this time last year, I was telling everyone that Christian McCaffrey would be the 3rd running back to hit 1,000. And not to toot my own horn, but we called it maybe a little bit of a homer, but it worked out nonetheless. But back to CeeDee Lamb, I am also going to buy CeeDee Lamb at 1,000 yards receiving. And while we're on it, I'm also going to buy your take on the Dallas Cowboys having 3 1,000-yard receivers. I've been saying it all off season too. Obviously, Amari Cooper is a fantastic talent. Michael Gallup had over 1,100 yards last year. There's no reason to believe he's going to slow down just because they've seen an upgrade from CeeDee Lamb or from Randall Cobb to CeeDee Lamb. And then going back to the whole targets thing, you hit the nail on the head. That is the exact point that I wanted to hit on. I don't foresee CeeDee Lamb only getting those 83 targets that Randall Cobb had. I definitely see him getting closer, if not a little bit more than 100 targets on the year. If he gets over 100 targets on the year, there's almost no way with how talented he is and just with how open that field is from all of that offensive talent, there's almost no way that CeeDee Lamb doesn't finish with 1,000 yards receiving this year. He's definitely my rookie wide receiver one. I have done everything that I possibly could to get my hands on him in all of my leagues before this season starts, because this time next year, he is going to be one of the hardest receivers to buy in Dynasty. I am planting my flag in that right now. And if you want CeeDee Lamb, you have to go out, make your offers now, because he's not going to get any cheaper.
I fully agree. I mean, this is another bold take, as it may seem, but this is going to sound bold. It's going to be scorching hot. CeeDee Lamb, by this time next year, is going to be a top 15 Dynasty wide receiver. He's going to be selected ahead of guys like Amari Cooper, guys like, I don't know, we'll say, what's a hot one? We'll say Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, all those guys. No question aside. CeeDee Lamb is going to be a 1,000-yard receiver going into next year, and he's going to be the best receiver in Dallas. That's how highly I believe in this kid. But again, call me a homer.
To build off of that, though, I was the exact same way about A.J. Brown until he landed himself in Tennessee, which we've talked about that before. I faded him too much, even though he was my number one overall receiver, yada, yada, yada. I regretted it, blah, 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 whatever. A.J. Brown is one of those top 15 Dynasty receivers already, right? After his rookie year, he's being drafted as such and everything like that. But there is a narrative for a lot of people, which I personally don't understand, and that's the whole regression thing. Oh, he was just too efficient last year. There's no way he keeps up with it, blah, blah, blah. I think that CeeDee Lamb is going to enter a similar conversation as A.J. Brown is, but I don't think it's going to be as heavily he's going to recess. I think it's just going to be, oh, he was a rookie phenom, and we have to get him on all of our Dynasty teams everywhere. So I really like that take a lot, and you and I are both fully buying CeeDee Lamb at 1,000 yards receiving in 2020. We'll move back to the running backs here, and I am going to bring up Indianapolis Colts rookie running back Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, he's widely loved in the fantasy football, especially Dynasty community. I'm a little bit more sour on him than most, and I guess we'll kind of figure out where you're at when we're buying and selling this. So buy or sell, by the end of 2020, Jonathan Taylor will be the every down back for the Indianapolis Colts.
See, now this is the one where the wording is especially key to me. But because of that, I'm going to buy. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those guys on Twitter who will just say, oh, yeah, Marlon Mack, Nahim Hines, they're redundant. JT will just dust them. I mean, have you seen the way this guy looks in fucking shorts? I mean, come on. Who are the coaches going to want on the field? But, I mean, to me, this just seems to be a similar situation to what we saw with Nick Chubb in 2018. I mean, the veteran starter is the lead back to start the season, but once the coaches witness how much talent the young back possesses, he will eventually take over. And, I mean, oddly enough, Jonathan Taylor, in terms of just skill set, in terms of the way he plays, does remind me of Nick Chubb. I mean, you got a talented breakaway runner who is able to absolutely explode on any single given carry. I mean, the way we're actually looking at him and his draft situation, as Marlon Mack is to JT, we saw Carlos Hyde was to Nick Chubb in Cleveland. Now, like Chubb, I expect this to be Taylor's back by week 5, week 6, not week 1, like some people will try to say. But again, it happened a little bit later for Chubb. I believe it was week 7 where he actually started getting the touch workload. And I do think that once Taylor's kind of able to show off his talent, the coaches will just have a hard time taking him off the field. And, I mean, the thing with him is he's not the most natural receiver. I mean, we all know that for right now. He's not a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's not even like a Deandre Swift out of the backfield. But, I mean, if you're actually seeing it, like aside from, I mean, people are going to point to the fumbles and everything like that, but aside from all that stuff, he was actually a decently efficient receiver in college when he did get his targets. So, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked, again, if we're seeing like a Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb kind of target load. I do think Nahim Hines is still ultimately going to get more receiving work, so he's going to get more targets. But I do think that when it's all said and done, by the end of the year, you're looking at a guy like Jonathan Taylor as like that 20 touch per game back by we'll say week 6 just to play it safe. But that's
yeah. I have to sell this one, and it's like I said, I'm a bit more sour than most are on Jonathan Taylor, and it's nothing against him being a running back. I think he has every bit of potential to be a similar back of like a Nick Chubb or a Derrick Henry kind of guy, and obviously there is definitely a place for that on any dynasty roster, on any redraft roster, on any roster on this planet. You would love to have a guy like that because he's probably going to be a top 15 guy at the position a lot sooner rather than later. But my issue is that since we're talking about him being the every down guy, I can't see it because this coaching staff has been talking up Nahim Hines. Hines has, like over 140 targets combined between 2019 and 2018, and 2018 was his rookie season. And I'm kind of throwing out 2019 as a whole for the Colts. I mean, they operated with Jacoby Brissett. They operated without T.Y. Hilton most of the year. And even when T.Y. Hilton was in, it was just totally shaky and just not what we were used to. I mean, I'm throwing that out completely for the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm just moving on straight from 2018 to 2020. I do think Nahim Hines is going to see a prolific role as a receiver out of the backfield, especially with Phillip Rivers there. I really have a tough time seeing Jonathan Taylor being on the field for most third downs. Is he going to be on the field third down occasionally? Absolutely. If it's short yard, if it's within 3, even 4 yards, maybe I can see Jonathan Taylor on the field because he's that good of a runner and he's behind that good of an offensive line. I just don't think that they're ever going to, I don't want to say never, but I think about at least 80 to 85% of the time, I don't think they're going to be calling his number when it's an obvious passing down situation. And that's my only flaw with Jonathan Taylor. It would be different. If it were just him and Marlon Mack, I would buy this 10 out of 10 times because Jonathan Taylor, like you said, he's a very efficient receiver. He can get the job done if he needs to. But it's just the fact of having Nahim Hines on that roster that makes me fade Jonathan Taylor as that quote-unquote every down kind of guy right now.
That's fair. I mean, again, the targets, I will agree with you. I don't necessarily think they're going to be like huge. They're not going to even be like, let's say, Ezekiel Elliott level where he's getting 70, 75 targets. Like I do realistically think that once he establishes that role, he'd probably be at that more so 50, 55 kind of target pace, which is ultimately like Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, my bad, type territory. But I mean, I don't know, because I mean, the term every down is kind of like,
it's a gray area.
It's weird because I mean, like realistically, like it fully depends on the situation on third down. Now, if a 3rd and 3 is going to be much different than a 3rd and 11. Like if it's a 3rd and 11, obviously you're going to have that more scat pack type like a Nahim Hines on. Where in a 3rd and 3, you still want to have the threat of the rushing being there. So yeah, I see him on the field in those kind of situations. So I mean, I don't think he's going to have a ton of like PPR reception upside, but I mean, I think that's going to be like Nick Chubb, supplemented by that rushing volume. So, I mean, he's one where like, I'm buying simply because like when I think of every down, I'm thinking of like, oh, workhorse. But I can totally agree that Nahim Hines is going to dip pretty significantly into that receiving production.
Yeah, so that's the first one on this list that you and I were split on. I'm sure there will be at least 1 or 2 more. But there you have it. Danny is buying Jonathan Taylor as the every down workhorse in Indy by the end of this season, where I am selling it purely because of my weird love for Nahim Hines, I guess. So we'll move on to a receiver, and we're going to talk about Jerry Judy, who is a part of the Denver Broncos organization. Danny, buy or sell? Now, this isn't for this season. This is for next season, right? So buy or sell, Jerry Judy will be the most targeted player in Denver by the end of the 2021 season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you clarified that too, because when I first read it, like on the show notes, I'm like, I thought that said 2020, so I was going to sell, right? But then once you explain, oh no, it's 2021, I actually looked at it. I'm like, okay, you know what? This is a full buy for me. I mean, when I'm just looking at it, yes, I am a Cortland Sutton fan. I've always been a Cortland Sutton fan, But in terms of just usage, in terms of just overall as a prospect, as a player, role on their offense, I do think Jerry Judy is ultimately going to be that lead receiver in terms of targets. Again, this really boils down to me, like in terms of who's going to be used in the slot more. It's going to be Jerry Judy. That's going to be his primary usage. He's going to get those intermediate routes, be able to be an absolute target machine. Again, I fully expect him to see that 8 to 10 target per game type role, while ultimately Sutton is going to more so adjust to that outside threat, take on your number one corner, be a red zone type threat. I mean, he's a big body. He can make some spectacular catches. I do think that's ultimately kind of going to be how they're leveled. I'm trying to think what kind of situation I can compare it to. I mean, maybe
I have a perfect one for you. I kind of view these two by this time in 21. So
I was going to say Tate Jones.
What's that?
I was going to say when Golden Tate and Marvin Jones kind of played together, like that kind of.
Yeah, that's actually perfect. Yeah. I was gonna say an OBJ and Landry kind of situation.
Oh yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Yeah, because Landry did lead Cleveland in targets last year, but OBJ was always the guy on the outside getting those top matchups, everything like that. Jarvis Landry is just, I don't want to say the safety blanket, but he is the highest targeted volume receiver on that offense. So I definitely could see Jerry Judy and Courtland Sutton kind of fusing into that kind of situation. I'll let you continue talking.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So a player, it's actually funny. When I looked at it, I'm like, okay, what's one player that I can kind of compare how Jerry Judy is going to be used in Denver? And the one guy I really thought of, I mean, he reminds me so much of how they used Emmanuel Sanders. And you stick him in the slot, he's going to be high usage. He gives you a little bit of vertical passing because he's still got speed. But his main role is ultimately to take the pressure off your quarterback and give you that intermediate threat. I mean, and we saw when Emmanuel Sanders is in his prime in Denver, I mean, he was an absolute target machine. Oh, yeah. I do see Jerry Judy ultimately filling that role again. It's a nice fit beside a guy like, for example, you still got Noah Fant, you still got KJ Hamler. Those guys can absolutely stretch the field while Jerry Judy is doing his work underneath. I do think by 2021, this is going to be the slimmest of margins because I still think Courtland Sutton is going to be that alpha outside threat. But I do buy that by 2021, Jerry Judy is going to be the Denver Broncos target leader.
Yeah. And like I was saying, I completely agree. I'm buying that every day of the week. I don't think it's not a CeeDee Lamb situation where he's going to come in and be a threat for 1,000 yards his first year. And that's not so much a knock on Jerry Judy, more so just a praise on the Dallas offense, I would say, CeeDee Lamb's situation. If you switch Jerry Judy into Dallas, I'd be having the exact same conversation that we just had with CeeDee Lamb because that's just situational. But Jerry Judy, he is just as talented, in my opinion, as CeeDee Lamb. He is obviously very highly coveted in rookie drafts and dynasty drafts, pretty much in any format. And he's going to go, I would say, in later single-digit rounds in a standard redraft league.
Yeah, like 8th, 9th round.
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity there. There's a ton of upside. I mean, it's a young offense. There's so much up and coming. I mean, Melvin Gordon just got there, but out of all of the skill positions, I mean, he's technically the most vetted player on that offense, and he just got here. So this is an offense that's going to grow a lot together over the next couple of years. And I think Jerry Judy is going to quickly become a household name in Denver. So I am agreeing with you 110%. I think Courtland Sutton is still going to be their outside receiver that takes away all of those top corner matchups and everything like that. But I do think Jerry Judy, at the end of the day, even if it's by a slim margin, I do think he's going to be the highest targeted player on the Denver offense by next season in 2021.
Glad we're on board. Let's go. Well, who's the next name that we got up in this buy or sell scenario?
So the next one is my personal favorite. I know you like him too. I'm really interested to see your thoughts on this one because I don't know if we're going to agree, but I sincerely hope we do. And that is going to be Detroit Lions rookie running back Deandre Swift. Buy or sell? Deandre Swift will total 1,000 yards and take over as the primary receiving back by the end of 2020. So he's going to have at least 1,000 scrimmage yards, and he's going to be the leading receiver out of that backfield by the end of this season.
Well, I've bought in a lot so far, so I'm just gonna buy again. Like, come on, are you guys? I have him as a top 17 back in redraft for a reason. I mean, it may sound bold that he's going to take over. Like a lot of people are like, oh, they're still carrying on Johnson. It's still the Detroit offense, pass dominant. Who actually, by the way, were 18th in pass to run split in neutral game scripts when Stafford was healthy. So below average. I mean, people thought they were in the top 5 when in reality, 18th is not even close to that. But if you're actually looking at it, okay, I think he can step in. And, I mean, this may sound like a lofty comparison because this guy is a universal top 4 back, but I do think he can provide that Alvin Kamara light impact even as soon as year 1. I mean, to me, he's clearly the most talented back in that backfield in Detroit. I mean, people want to hype up Kerryon Johnson. That is fine. But if you look at the efficiencies, if you look at the injury problems, if you look at just as prospect, I mean, it is clear as day to me that Deandre Swift outclasses Kerryon Johnson every single one of those ways to analyze. Now, you know what I mean, ways to analyze, whatever. Although he may not be a workhorse as soon as week 1, I mean, I do still expect at the early part of the season, he's still going to have that 12 to 15 touch baseline with passing game usage. I mean, keep in mind, Kerryon Johnson averaged over 16 touches per game, despite always having injury concerns, despite being inefficient with those touches. Now, if we're actually looking at it, I do think that 12 to 15 touch baseline at minimum is going to keep our Swift in that RB2 area. Maybe fringe. Maybe he's closer to 20 than he is to 12. But I do think he's going to be in that range for the majority of the season with potential league-winning type upside down the stretch. If you're actually looking at it, well, I mean, obviously you still got to consider offensive coordinator tendencies. This isn't the full picture. I mean, you still have to look at how Bevel will affect the game in terms of the play calling. But when I'm actually looking at the splits with Matthew Stafford under center for Detroit, it kind of gives light into Swift's potential usage as the team's primary receiving back. So, I mean, I broke it down in basically between 2011 and 2018, because 2019 he got hurt halfway through the season. In those 8 years when Stafford was healthy, his backs in general, his running backs, have averaged 134.75 targets per year and had a 21.975% target market share. If you're actually breaking that down, respectively, would have ranked 6th and 15th in the league in 2019. People's first thing that they take away when looking at Detroit, again, passing game. They only threw to the running backs 11% of the time in the entirety of 2019. But keep in mind, Stafford missed 8 games. And they, not to mention, I mean, you're looking at Kerryon Johnson, who's not even close to the receiving back that Deandre Swift is. Let's look at the actual 8-year sample size we had before that, where he ranked, again, as I mentioned, 6th and 15th respectively when looking at those metrics. I mean, overall, while I do think Kerryon Johnson could come back, see a little bit of the rushing work, maybe a little bit of goal line, I fully expect they're just not going to absolutely phase him out of the offense. But I mean, Swift is a guy who's easily the most viable receiving back on the team. And just because of that, I think he has a very respectable rookie year with RB1 upside beyond this year. So 2021 especially on, once he establishes himself this year as that efficient passing game back, 12 to 15 baseline, I do think 2021 on, he is going to be a consensus top level back. So I fully buy this take.
I just can't stop daydreaming on what would have happened if Deandre Swift landed himself in Kansas City.
Oh, man.
Like that, I mean, to me, that would have been a match made in heaven. And I'm 1,010% buying this line of Swift totaling at least 1,000 yards and taking over as the primary receiving back. I would even go one further and think that he's going to lead this team in rushing attempts because, like you said, Kerryon Johnson, he's less than efficient. He's never on the field, it seems. Like there's just so many points of attack for Deandre Swift to come in and get the opportunity. And I sincerely think that he's going to get that opportunity a lot sooner rather than later. And the sooner he gets it, the sooner he's going to run away with it. You know, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see I think him and Kerryon Johnson are going to be, for the most part, as long as Kerryon Johnson is healthy this season, I think they're going to be more of a two-headed monster where they're going to be complementing each other a lot. But I do think that as soon as the end of this year, as soon as the second half of this year, I think Deandre Swift at the very least becomes the 1A and Kerryon Johnson becomes the 1B. I do think Deandre Swift is going to be the quote-unquote primary back by the midway point of the season just because he is so supremely talented. And to build off of your point, this Detroit landing spot is most definitely not a kiss of death by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you look at the running backs that have been there over the last however many years, there's never been like a legitimate good running back there. Kerryon Johnson is the most hyped up Detroit running back that actually deserved the hype in such a long time, except for, I don't know, who was the last guy? Like Joik Bell or something like that?
I was actually going to bring that up. So the last time, because I mean, I was getting into a conversation with Lucas, and he's like, oh, well, when you're taking the full backfield and like looking at the leading receiver, you have to look at like what the leading rusher's receiving output was. And I'm like, that's just simply inefficient because Detroit just hasn't had that guy who's done it in both facets in such a long time. The last time we actually saw that was in 2013 when they, believe it or not, can you guess who their back was in 2013?
Joik Bell is my best guess.
Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush in 2013 was the last time that they had a back who was both their leading target getter and their leading rusher. And that year, in 14 games, Reggie Bush was able to produce 1,006 rushing yards, coupled with 80 targets and 506 receiving yards in 14 games. So I mean, the sky's the limit. First of all, that's not just a Reggie Bush who was coming off the second overall pick, great year at USC. No. This is a 28-year-old Reggie Bush going into his third NFL team. Deandre Swift is a coveted top 35 draft pick coming into the system as a 21-year-old kid. I mean, the sky is the limit for him here, realistically. And again, I don't think that they're going to absolutely phase out Kerryon year one. But I mean, 2021 on, I mean, I think this guy can absolutely be a staple in fantasy football. I mean, he's got the talent to, he's got the opportunity to. Now we just got to see that mold together because I'm all in on this kid.
Yeah, I am too. And a lot of people are going to say that he's not going to get this big opportunity his rookie year because he is a rookie. If you go back to Kerryon Johnson's rookie year, he was significantly more efficient in 2018 than he was in 2019. I'll be the first one to admit that. But if Kerryon Johnson had actually played a full 16-game season without going down to injury, which obviously is something we've come to know with Kerryon Johnson over the last couple of years, he was on pace to be a top 14 PPR running back. And that's as a rookie. That's after the coach is coming out that exact same year and not committing to Kerryon Johnson in the run game whatsoever. That's when people were still worried about LeGarrette Blount being like a legitimate running back threat in that backfield. So the whole narrative around Detroit, whether it be how they play their running backs, whether it be how they play their rookies, whether it be how they target their rookies or target their running backs, none of it seems to be true because if you take a deeper dive into it, the numbers are, as you said, the numbers are actually pretty damn good. And there's a lot of opportunity coming up for Deandre Swift. There's a reason why he was pretty much the consensus #1 rookie running back prior to the NFL combine because he's so good. He is supremely talented. He's not.
His tape, man.
What's that?
His tape.
Oh, I know. He's filthy. And you know what the cool thing is about Deandre Swift? Is he the best pure runner in this draft class? No. Is he the best pass catcher in this draft class out of the running backs? No. But he is top 2, top 3 in almost any conversation you can have about the running backs in this rookie class. And that's why he's going to be so successful because he is the jack of all trades that you want. As you were saying, like a Alvin Kamara kind of guy, he can come in, he can do it all. And he's got so much sneaky upside this year. I'm going to move on from Deandre Swift because I know you and I can talk about
him all day
for a million years and not get tired of it. But long story short, Danny and I are both buying Deandre Swift totaling 1,000 yards from scrimmage this year and being the lead receiver out of this backfield. So we're moving on to another receiver. As you can see, there's kind of a pattern: running back, receiver. And this one, I think both you and I are a little conflicted on, and that's going to be Jalen Reger of the Philadelphia Eagles. Can he be the wide receiver 1 in Philly? Now, let me explain that a little bit further before we go on. We're throwing out Zach Ertz, we're throwing out Dallas Goedert, we're throwing out Miles Sanders. Is Jalen Reger going to be Carson Wentz's go-to guy this year?
See, this is the one that kind of had me like conflicted, because if it was by 2021, I would fully say 100% he's going to be that guy by 2021. Now, when we're talking 2020, I do think if we're talking about a per game basis in terms of target share, that when Desean Jackson is on the field, he is going to lead that receiving core in targets, just because, I mean, we saw the chemistry that those two had last year. We've seen it over the years. When Desean Jackson is healthy, he's an absolute game breaker on the outside. Now, the main thing that I really have to detract from the statement, if Desean Jackson goes down, which I do kind of expect to happen at some point this year, I mean, Jalen Reger could fully, by the end of the season, be the team leader in targets and out of the receiver room. But, I mean, if we're talking about in terms of a per-game basis, who's going to lead that team in targets per game, and if we got a full season from Desean Jackson, I do think it's still going to be him. I mean, to me, like, I love Jalen Reger as a prospect. I mean, you got the speed, the athletic ability. I mean, I wrote about him in the draft guide. You guys can check him out. But, I mean, the problem is he's still a little bit raw in terms of transferring from that TCU offense to ultimately what's going to be expected of him at the professional rank playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. Well, Desean Jackson, I mean, he's one of the most veteran receivers in the league. He's adjusted to basically every situation that he's been in. Even though he only played 3 games last year, he was dynamite in those 3 games, if anybody remembers having him in fantasy or DFS in those weeks. So, yes, I mean, again, it's a tough one because I do expect Desean Jackson to go down. I think Jalen Reger is going to lead in targets, but I'm going to sell this one simply due to the fact that when Desean Jackson is on the field, I do still think that he'll operate that wide receiver role. Now, we're talking 2021. I do think by then Jalen Reger is going to be polished enough to step into that role and develop his game because, I mean, as a talent, he's easily a top 5 receiver in this class. I mean, you want to make that argument of I would still say, like, if you want to argue him over CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Judy, I would say no. But, I mean, if you want to argue between, like, Ruggs, him, Justin Jefferson, I am fully fine with whatever order you have those guys. But, yeah, I'm going to sell this one for the 2020 season.
You know what's weird? I'm going to buy this one, but I still think he finishes with less fantasy points than Jerry Judy this year. And the reason why is because we've seen over the last couple of years, it does not take a very effective stat line to be the quote-unquote wide receiver 1 out of Philly. And the reason why I made this for the 2020 season as opposed to the 2021 season is because there is a narrative that Jalen Reger is going to take over as Philly's go-to guy this year, especially with Alshon Jeffrey starting off on the PUP list, Desean Jackson's injuries, Greg Ward having to step in and be the potential wide receiver 2 in this offense. I mean, there are so many things going wrong in Philly that would lead to a rookie receiver being the number 1 guy there. And I am buying it. I do think that Alshon Jeffrey being out is going to give Jalen Reger plenty of opportunities. I don't think Desean Jackson is going to be able to stay healthy or even just be on the field in general with whatever the hell he's got going on right now. He's all over the place. I don't think it's going to take much to get Jalen Reger there. Like, seriously, like, this is an opportunity where, like, Reger could come in and get like 50 to 55 receptions for like 700 yards, if that, and he could easily lead those receivers both in targets, in receptions, even in just receiving work in general with yards and touchdowns. So I am buying this, especially with all the hype that he's getting from those coaches and the early draft capital that they spent on him. I think they're going to use him a lot sooner than later, and I'm not going to be surprised if he is their number 1 guy, not named Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, or Miles Sanders. So I totally see where you're coming from. I'm also on the fence with it, but it's just the fact that it doesn't take any spectacular number to be the wide receiver 1 in Philly. That's the reason why I'm buying this.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what happens when you have basically 220, 230 targets allocated to 2 tight ends on your offense. I mean, plain and simple. I mean, that's just going when Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz are on the field, they are going to easily surpass 200 combined targets and probably near that, as I mentioned, 230-ish range. Yeah, I mean, it's one that I'm kind of on the fence of because I do think, like, when Jackson is healthy, he's going to operate that role. But at the same time, I mean, he's most likely not going to be healthy. So again, if you have him in best ball, if you have him, like, if you take a guy like Desean Jackson, Jalen Reger, like late in your drafts, well, this is Dynasty, so Jalen Reger is going to be going like way up, and I fully advocate for that for 2021 on. But I mean, if we're talking just strictly redraft, if you get one of those guys later on, couple boom weeks, I mean, I prefer either of them more so in a best ball because, again, as you mentioned, like those tight ends are going to funnel a ton of targets. But yeah, I'm kind of just talking to talk right now because, again, as I mentioned, I don't think either of them, if they lead the receiver room in targets, is going to necessarily be a hefty total. So I'll agree with you there.
Yeah. So Jalen Reger may or may not be the wide receiver one to own in Philly, but don't take that as he's going to be a wide receiver one in fantasy because it's just not happening, at least not his rookie year. There's tons of opportunity, tons of potential there and everything like that. But be on the lookout in case Jalen Reger does end up leading those receivers. That is likely going to increase his value. I don't want to say significantly, but it's definitely going to increase his value over the course of the next year or so.
Fully agree.
So we'll move on. We're going to go back to the running backs. I got another one to talk about, and that's going to be J.K. Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens. So there is not a lot of doubt that this is still Mark Ingram's backfield, or at the very least, Mark Ingram is 1,000% going to be the 1A of this backfield for 2020. But I got to ask you, buy or sell, J.K. Dobbins will be the guy of this backfield by the start of 2021.
Now, see, I'm going to buy this, but I mean, the use of the words like the guy, I'm not too sure about because since I do believe that Mark Ingram will still be worked into the rotation heavily in 2021. And again, that'll be the final year of the 3-year, $50 million contract that he signed when he left the Saints to join the Ravens. But I mean, however, if the question is, does he lead the team in touches in 2021? I fully buy that scenario. I mean, to me, Dobbins landed in the perfect situation possible for him as a prospect. I mean, we saw his success at Ohio State with and without a mobile quarterback. And then he lands in the spot in the NFL with the most mobile quarterback we have ever seen. So again, this is a guy who he may never be a 300-touch workhorse back. But I mean, if you're giving this guy 250 touches with the receiving role, incredible efficiencies he's going to have in that insanely efficient offense, and ultimately a ton of touchdown upside, I do think Dobbins could very well be a top 10 fantasy football running back in 2021, just kind of as Ingram basically did last year. I mean, we saw Mark Ingram on 228 touches in 15 games finish last year as the RB9. So I'll buy it if you're referring to leading the team from the running back position in touches. But if it's just he's going to be the guy, there's going to be no competition whatsoever, I'm going to sell that because I do think that while Dobbins may see 150, I could very well see in 2021 Mark Ingram still being that 1B, 150 to 200 type touches. So I'll buy it if it's referring to leading the team in total opportunities.
Yep, and that's exactly it. And for that reason, I'm going to buy it as well. J.K. Dobbins, I think he will 1,000% lead the team in opportunities out of the backfield in 2021. Now, you mentioned Mark Ingram's contract. He's signed until the end of 21. I believe I can't imagine they actually take advantage of it, but I believe there's an opt-out after this year. So if by somehow J.K. Dobbins goes in there and blows the roof off the place, that is definitely something to monitor. But if J.K. Dobbins is blowing the roof off of the place, chances are if you don't have him in Dynasty, you're not getting your hands on him at that point anyway.
No. I mean, by then he's going to be a top 10, top 8 at the minimum back. I mean, yeah. That's just so much fun. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, but I think J.K. Dobbins is definitely going to be the guy to own on that backfield. He's going to lead them in rushing attempts. He's going to lead them in targets out of the backfield, everything like that. I mean, he's a very good, very talented all-around kind of running back. And I think that he'd be able to handle it, especially because, as you mentioned, Mark Ingram, his work on the ground, his work through the air was just very efficient with Lamar Jackson. Mark Ingram is not by any stretch of the imagination a receiving running back, and he absolutely killed it in PPR leagues last year. J.K. Dobbins is a more talented receiving back than Mark Ingram is, and I believe that he will also go forward and absolutely smash it in PPR leagues. Like you were saying, I can totally picture J.K. Dobbins being a top 10 running back, and I think if he is going to be the guy by the start of 2021, in startups everywhere, he's going to be drafted as a top 13 kind of guy. Even at that point, if Mark Ingram is still in the team, Just knowing that he's going to come in and absolutely quote unquote run away with the job in 2021, I think is going to be a very big asset. So I'm going to buy this, and I'm not even going to hesitate about it. I'm just buying this straight up. J.K. Dobbins is going to take over this backfield.
We fully agree there. Now, who is the next receiver we're going to be discussing here?
So the next receiver, definitely a controversial one. Now, I had mentioned that I have the top 5 consensus running backs on this list, and I had 4 of the top consensus wide receivers on this list, and this other guy has kind of been sneaking around through the drafts lately. His ADP has been rising. He has been getting a lot of buzz, a lot of hype, and his quarterback, Derek Carr, trusts him. And, of course, I'm talking about Bryan Edwards. So buy or sell. Bryan Edwards takes over as the Vegas wide receiver 1 this year. Now, it's the same exact buy or sell as we had with Jalen Reger, except now we're talking about Bryan Edwards with the Raiders.
I mean, in terms of pre-draft cycle, I was one of the highest on this guy. He was my wide receiver 7. But I can't neglect the fact that my wide receiver 3 ended up there as well in Henry Ruggs. Now, it's going to be a tough hill to climb for either of them to lead the team in targets at the receiver position, because we're not even talking about Waller. Obviously, he's going to lead the team in targets. But, I mean, in terms of just leading the overall receiving core in targets, I mean, they're still competing with guys like, again, Hunter Renfrow, Tyrell Williams, so I do think they're still going to kind of figure in for 2020. Tyrell Williams, for all I know, could be cut by the start of the season, but I doubt that with that rookie young core that they have. But I'm going to sell it simply because I do think that Henry Ruggs is still the guy that they want to get the most involved out of the receiving core. I mean, Bush is probably screaming at his laptop right now saying, sell, Henry Ruggs, God. But I will side with that in the sense that they wouldn't have just taken Henry Ruggs over Lamb and Judy if they didn't have a plan to get the ball in his hands. Now, they see the way that Tyreek Hill has been used in KC. Now, I am by no means comparing him to Tyreek Hill, but could we see a Terry McLaurin type usage for a guy like Henry Ruggs? I think we could. I mean, plain simple. I know we're not talking about Henry Ruggs right now. We're talking about Bryan Edwards. That kind of correlates to the fact that I do think Bryan Edwards can right off the bat operate that possession type role, maybe get some usage in the slot, maybe even lead the team in touchdowns because he's got a big body, can be used in the red zone. But in terms of overall leading that receiving core in production, being their quote-unquote wide receiver 1, leading them in targets, I would still say that I would put my money on Ruggs before I put it on Edwards. But again, if there's a scenario where that happened where, again, he was the possession guy, he was getting that user similar to like a Jerry Judy versus Sutton situation, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'll still put my money on Ruggs because I do think that they're going to, quote unquote, use him like he was the 12th overall pick. And I mean, he's talented enough, again, to be that 100-target guy eventually. I'm not sure about 2020 because I still think Waller is going to absolutely dominate that target share. But, yeah. I mean, for the long-term future, I still think that Ruggs is going to be the number 1. But that's no knock on Edwards because I think he's got the potential to be a truly high upside wide receiver 2 in that offense. I mean, if Derek Carr trusts him and trusts the way they're going to – I trust the way they're going to use Henry Ruggs, I think that passing offense can be very potent. So, I mean, I know you are buying this one. What are your thoughts on the Edwards versus – we'll just call it the Edwards versus Ruggs debate because that's basically what it is.
Yeah. So, like you said, I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, think that anyone is going to surpass Darren Waller. But luckily for us, Darren Waller is the tight end, so he is exempt. I think this is an offense that's really going to spread it around this year. You know, it's a very young offense. Derek Carr's still putting everything together. This coaching staff is still putting everything together. They have a lot of experimenting to do with all of their guys. Now, the reason why I'm buying this is because quarterbacks don't typically just throw out the word trust for any given receiver. And Derek Carr, over the past few days, has said that he fully trusts Bryan Edwards. The things that he's doing in camp is spectacular. He used Bryan Edwards and Devontae Adams in the same sentence, which I will be the first person to tell you not to buy into all the training camp hype and everything like that. But it's always a little bit different for me when it's coming directly from the quarterback that's going to be throwing the ball. So I'm not going to go out and say Bryan Edwards is going to be the second coming of Devontae Adams. He's good, but he's not that good.
There's a difference between Derek Carr saying that he trusts him and that he likens him to Devontae Adams compared to fucking Josh Jacobs just saying, "Oh, I'm going to catch 60 balls."
Yeah.
There's a difference there because I mean,
yeah, like Derek Carr, he controls which receivers are getting what by the end of at the end of the play. He is controlling who this ball is going to, and it's kind of a similar situation as in Philly, where they're not going to need this fantastic stat line to be the quote unquote wide receiver one in that offense, and purely for the fact that I think this ball is going to be spread around a decent amount. I think Bryan Edwards is going to be more or less, if we're not counting Darren Waller, the safety blanket for Derek Carr, especially if that trust persists throughout the entire season and grows throughout the entire season. I can just see Bryan Edwards being the go-to guy for Derek Carr whenever the play breaks down or whenever just, I see it happening. I think Bryan Edwards is going to be the wide receiver one on this team this year. I think in the long run, I would rather have Henry Ruggs out of these two guys. I completely agree. But I just think until they get on the same page, until they figure out what they're doing with Henry Ruggs, I think that trust from Derek Carr to Bryan Edwards is going to go a pretty long way this year.
That definitely fair points. Again, like this is one where I love both players. So if either of them takes that role, I'll be super excited. But I'm going to side with Ruggs on this one. But again, Edwards is still a fucking baller. So who is the next running back that we're going to be discussing today? Because I think
we got
every single one.
Yep, we got the one final running back and we got the one final receiver. And I'm sticking to the top 5 consensus running backs, and it's going to be with Cam Akers. So this one, I don't think you or I really knows what the hell's going on with this one. But buy or sell, Cam Akers is going to lead that team, the Rams, in rushing attempts and targets out of the backfield.
See, this is the one that was kind of curious to me because I had to really look into like, okay, well, what exactly was Darrell Henderson's role in Memphis? And I mean, he was super, first of all, I mean, all these fucking Memphis running backs are super fucking efficient. That's why everybody loves them every single year coming out of the draft process. But I looked into it, and I mean, he didn't get a ton of receiving work at Memphis, but what he did with those touches was incredibly efficient. So I didn't really know what to make of that. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, like that didn't really tell me much because last year he only had 4 receptions to begin with. And I've just looked at it over the years, right? And the lead back typically has been the bell cow. Now we're talking about Brian Gurley, so I mean, I don't really know what to make of that either. And there's no other sample size to really like fully look into McVay because realistically, from then he was on the Redskins. I'm not sure he had too much say there, but I'm going to buy this because I do think out of being a complete all-around back on the team, that Akers is the best there. Now, would I be shocked if Darrell Henderson led the team in targets or from the running back position? I would not. I think Cam Akers is most likely a lock to have it in terms of the rushing attempts. I mean, I just think that's not really a debate because I don't necessarily view Darrell Henderson as that between the tackles runner like I would view a guy like Cam Akers. But this really comes down to, okay, who do I think is going to lead the team in targets from the running back position? And if I had to guess one, I do believe it's going to be Cam Akers, simply because I do think he's the most developed in the pass blocking game. I mean, that people normally don't really associate that. For most backs, like a guy like Clyde or Solaire, he's going to be on so many routes, it doesn't matter. But for a team like the Rams, I do think that's going to come into play, especially because, again, this running back room is kind of so divided in that aspect. So, I mean, if he's going to be the best pass blocker there, we both saw on film, I mean, the effort, the physicality he showed in that pass blocking game was ultimately getting him on the field. And really a trait that I really admired from him coming out of Florida State. But if that's the case, if he is the most developed pass blocker, I do think he's on the field on those third downs. And ultimately, if he's on the field on those third downs, he's going to get more targets from those guys. So I will buy it simply because, again, he's got the lock on the rushing attempts, and I do think he's going to be on the field enough to see those passing attempts ultimately lead to the team lead. So what are your thoughts?
I'm actually going to go a different route. So I'm going to sell this. Okay. And I'm going to reverse it. So you said he has a lock on the rushing attempts and the receiving attempt or the targets is going to be was in question. I think Cam Akers is going to be the clear guy out of the backfield in terms of the passing game, but I actually think he's going to be in heavy competition for the rushing attempts. And my biggest thing is I'm not a big believer in Darrell Henderson, but I know the Rams believe in Malcolm Brown. They put a second round tender on him and ended up holding on to him. I mean, they're pretty big into him, and I wouldn't be very surprised to see him get more and more involved this year, especially now that Todd Gurley's out of there. Again, it's not like I think Malcolm Brown is going to run away with the rushing attempts or Darrell Henderson is going to significantly take away attempts from Cam Akers. I think it's going to be, in terms of rushing attempts, I think it's going to be as close to a three-headed backfield as we're possibly going to see. I think the splits are going to be very even in terms of attempts and everything like that. But I do think Cam Akers is going to have the initial receiving work just because, I mean, in the past, Darrell Henderson, not that he's seen a lot of opportunities, but it's not like he's showed us anything to make us believe that he's going to be a decent receiving back for that team. So although I do like Cam Akers and I think he's going to be a fairly balanced player, I am going to sell that he is going to lead the team in targets and rushing attempts out of that backfield.
Definitely fair. So we're split there, but again, that Rams situation is a mess. Obviously, in Dynasty, Cam Akers is going to be the guy long term. But I mean, in redraft, I'm most likely just not going to touch it. So who was the final name out of the receivers, in fact, that we're going to be discussing today in terms of these scenarios? I know the answer. The viewers don't. You know the answer. Let's tell them.
So the final one that we're going over today is Justin Jefferson. So we're back into that top 5 consensus wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, whether it was pre-draft or post-draft after he went to the Minnesota Vikings, he has always been considered a top 5 rookie receiver for the majority of fantasy fans out there. So I'm going to ask you, it's a pretty big question. Buy or sell? Will Justin Jefferson become as big of an asset in fantasy as Stephon Diggs by the 2021 season? So I'm not asking, is Justin Jefferson going to live up to what Stephon Diggs was able to do this year? I'm saying between now and the end of the 2021 season, are we going to be looking at Justin Jefferson in the same light that we have for Stephon Diggs, kind of as that top 15, top 20 wide receiver with obvious upside?
I'm going to have to sell this one. I mean, when I'm actually looking at the situation in general, especially because, I mean, we could talk about early in his career. I mean, Stephon Diggs has always been a fantastic player in real life. I mean, you're talking about speed, you're talking about route running, you're talking about consistency. I mean, he is just an absolute phenom in all those regards. But let's look specifically at 2018, 2019. So in 2018, the pass to run split was, in fact, a lot higher towards the pass than it was last year. And ultimately, we saw both Thielen and Diggs absolutely dominating that year. Again, the thing is Diggs had 149 targets that year, right? I don't think Jefferson's ever really going to see that with a healthy Thielen and the new run-dominant scheme that they're ultimately going to be running down there. Now, if you're looking at it basically last year, he received only 94 targets without Thielen there. And yet, even on those 94 targets, he's still able to produce over 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns, which is just absurd efficiency. 17.9 yards per reception. Absolutely a dynamite asset last year if you had him. But, I mean, I love Justin Jefferson as a prospect, but trying to say that he's going to replace the production of a guy like Diggs, who, in my opinion, in terms of talent, is at the minimum top 12 receiver in the league. It's setting the bar a little high. And now, if we're talking about a perennial top 25, top 30 receiver, I can fully buy that. But again, this also has to do by 2021. Now, if we're talking about past that, Thielen getting older, Jefferson establishing himself more in the offense, I can maybe see that, but by 2021, I just simply can't see it because, again, Thielen, when he's on the field, is going to demand a higher target share in that Minnesota Vikings offense, which ultimately won't have a lot of passing attempts to begin with. So, again, I like Jefferson, but I just don't think he reaches Diggs' heights in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. I'm selling this one, and like you said, it's not a knock to Justin Jefferson. It's just that given the situation and what Stephon Diggs was able to do in Minnesota, I mean, that's a pretty high standard to ask Justin Jefferson to live up to over the first 2 years of his career. I mean, I feel like one thing that has been really misconstrued lately in the dynasty community is that wide receivers are supposed to come in and immediately produce. We got so spoiled last year with DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Debo Samuel, whoever else. I mean, there were so many rookie receivers, Terry McLaurin. There were so many rookie receivers that came in and just absolutely showed out last year. And we have to keep in mind that that's not typical. We'll see one, maybe two rookie receivers come in and get over, 800 or 900 yards. But you don't see a big handful of guys like that, like legitimately throwing it out there in their rookie year. And I just don't think that Justin Jefferson is going to be one of those guys. It's like you were saying, Stephon Diggs is one of those dudes where he's arguably a top 12 receiver in the league in terms of talent, where his fantasy comes in. He's ridiculously efficient. He's got week-winning upside whenever he's on the field. And I just don't foresee that same kind of thing happen to Justin Jefferson. So the reason why I picked this one specifically for Justin Jefferson is because that is a big narrative that has been thrown around Twitter over the last 2, 3, 4 months, however long, since Justin Jefferson has been in Minnesota. And is he going to come in and immediately replace Stephon Diggs? In terms of being the wide receiver 2 on the team, sure, he's going to come in and replace Stephon Diggs. But in terms of being the same type of player that Stephon Diggs was, in terms of putting up that same efficiency, that same production, that same potential elite week-winning output for fantasy purposes, I don't see it happening over the first couple of years. I can see him developing into a consistently top 20 receiver at some point in his career. I just don't think he's going to be one of the guys that does it over the first 2 years.
Yeah, I fully agree there. Mentioned my points as well, but yeah, that was a ton of fun. A lot of hypothetical scenarios that I love engaging in. Again, Dynasty is about not only realizing what's going to happen in the now, but being able to project forward in terms of what you believe is going to happen. Again, a lot of these guys, as we mentioned, their 2021 outlook is going to look a lot better than specifically in their 2020. But yeah, that was a ton of fun. I mean, I just love talking football in general, especially when we talk Dynasty, your Dynasty Stock Market series that we have going on the Fantasy Stock Exchange channel. But yeah, super pumped to join you. Anytime you fucking want to talk, let me know. We'll record these out, get these going. But yeah, if you guys are watching right now and you've made it this far, make sure you go like, comment, subscribe down below. Comment on what you guys think about the scenarios, what you guys think is going to happen, whether you agree or disagree with me or Mikey. Let us know down below. We will happily engage with you guys in that comment section. If you guys haven't already, make sure you go check out Mikey on Twitter as well. We'll have that link in the description if you guys want to follow me as well while you're down there. I mean, I wouldn't mind it, but yeah. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here, Mikey?
No, nothing aside from, for myself, for you, for Dynasty Stock Market here on the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys again next week.
Peace out.